in today's world of uncertainty, you can't really rely on those patterns you've learned from the past because those answers aren't working.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 40 seconds in, we're going.
Never in the field of human conflict.
How do you measure such an astonishing moment in history?
You're listening to the bigQUEST podcast with Andy Murray. In a high-stakes, unpredictable world, every day is ripe with blue ocean adventures just waiting to be discovered. You need the mindset, the methods, and the motivation to lead with confidence into the unknown. Come along as we talk to today's top leaders, known for simplifying challenges, outsmarting variables, and inspiring greatness. Hi. Welcome, bigQUEST podcast, episode number 1. Andy Murray here. I'm Ben Ortlip, sitting alongside Andy, producing. Andy, we're excited about this. This has been a long journey for you. Tell us how you're feeling at the start of this.
Yeah, well, I got to tell you, Ben, you've kind of nailed it on that intro. That certainly raises the bar for expectations. I love it.
I recognize that guy's voice. Yeah.
I do too. Yeah. Well, it just gave me a little goosebumps because it's been such a long journey of trying to get to a launch, and I'm so excited about what we're doing with the bigQUEST, and this podcast series is going to be something I think that's going to be very special.
So we should acknowledge, we're in the middle of the COVID shutdown here, and but I'll be honest, it hasn't slowed us down at all this year, has it?
No. I feel like I'm working harder. I understand Zoom fatigue, but I tell you, it just feels like we're hitting it pretty hard on trying to get all the pieces together and launching, as you know, because you guys help launch brands all the time, and launching a brand is quite a bit of work to do to get all the pieces right and get it to where you're happy with it. And so I think we spent from April to now working through all of the things you need to work through to really understand your message, make sure it's clear, make sure all the ideas are flowing together. There's just so much to it.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like a big quest, isn't it?
Yeah, a quest to define a quest. So yeah. How's that?
All right. So let's unpack this a little bit here because, if I'm tuning in for the first time, I might be thinking to myself, okay, but what do they mean by bigQUEST? Because there's a lot of different ways to perceive and interpret those words. Let's start with, where did this come from for you? The whole idea of a bigQUEST, because it's really birthed out of a lot of the experiences that you've had throughout your career.
Well, that's a great question. I'm sure we're going to get asked that quite a bit. I've got really two sides to my set of experiences from a career standpoint. One side has been in startup, selling the house, selling the furniture, and going for it to do something from scratch. Which meant every day you're waking up doing something new, building a team, growing that team, scaling it to a global perspective. And I think most of that journey was, it felt like it was all blue ocean related. But then I spent 10 years in corporate prior to that, and 6-7 years after that in big Fortune 50 type company. And it was... there was a different feel to that corporate vibe that you could feel, and you didn't really jump into big blue ocean work that much. It was much more about incremental scaling optimization, being able to do things, small little things sometimes, but scaling them over time. And I felt like I wanted that opportunity to do some of the bigger things inside companies that where the norm is a bit more short-termism at times and incremental, and it's harder to get bigger things done that are especially in new spaces. And so it took some of those early agency building type principles we had used and put them to work inside of a corporation, and they worked. And so we did some amazing things with Fight Hunger, Spark Change, and Greenlight a Vet, some big programs that were hard to pull off. Went to Asda, spent 4 years in the UK, different country, different environment, but still big company challenges in doing new and exciting things.
you saw some things in business, going all the way back, really, as I've heard your story, going back to your days at Dayspring, Thompson Murray, Walmart, Procter & Gamble, all these different places where you've worked. And this idea of a big quest really was born out of a gap that you identified in the marketplace. Talk a little bit about that. What was the thing that you saw that was maybe missing from some of the mindset of the way things were operating at different places like that?
Yeah, well, I mean, you get into trying to do big new things. It does take a different mindset in terms of how you approach so many different aspects, and we can get into that, but how you invite people in to participate with you, that's a completely different approach. A lot of big things are done in skunk work type teams, but a lot of those failed. They didn't really get off the ground. How do you get buy-in? There was a gap into really understanding buy-in development. Sure, there's a lot of leadership frameworks and different things you can do with leadership. A lot of it's been done, right? But the gap is the leadership approach to actually figure out how to put three things together: a mindset that's different toward leadership itself, and how do you lead from the back than leading from the front, and then some real methodologies that are proven methods that I've seen my own self do, and had watched many leaders that are doing really cool breakthrough things they do on a regular basis. And so some of those gaps are, how do you sequence change so that you can play on the house's money and move those forward? How do you simplify a really complex challenge? It's one thing to understand complexity. It's another to be able to make sense out of complexity so that others can follow you and buy in. And so I saw a lot of these gaps. And when you start putting these pieces together into a collection of string of pearls, if you will, of ideas that could work together, that's what we spent the last 6 months doing. You see a little more clearly how it is accessible to anyone that wants to lead something forward and get something done. The ideas are all around us. There's actually an abundance of opportunity, but there's a scarcity of leaders that can really take on and drive new challenges. I think that's a bit of the gap that I've seen. And by the way, one more thing I think it's important, Ben, is that there are so many people working in organizations today. Matter of fact, Gallup polls suggest 85% of people come to work disaffected, disengaged, disconnected from what they feel like their true value contribution can be. And you think about that, that's 15% of capacity that's discretionary, that's not getting put into play. And my experience has been, when you get somebody really connect to a meaningful piece of work that can change the game, and it's really clear, and you've got these things working for you, you tap into that discretionary capacity. I mean, the Wright brothers said they couldn't wait to get up in the morning. And that energy is pent up in most organizations and waiting to be tapped. And I think the bigQUEST approach is to be able to tap into that and be able to get people excited and participating and co-creating with you on something that can change. By the way, one more thing, I think Agile is something that's putting more catalyst against this space as well, because with e-commerce, digital, physical coming together, this idea of getting really close to the customer and inventing and coming up with new ideas, blue ocean type ideas for customers, that demand is right now through the roof. And COVID's even accelerated that. The Agile technology lets you do that. It lets you experiment with its methods, but there's still a gap there in the leadership side on how do you lead differently an Agile project. And so what we've worked on and are working on is Agile is a core method, and to be an Agile leader is a little different. And to be a right brain leader, it's a bit step on from what I've seen in the past.
Yeah. So you talked about discretionary effort. You talked about the disengagement epidemic that's obviously rampant and has been since 1990 when Gallup first published their Q12 survey. So is bigQUEST an answer to disengagement? You talked about kind of the daily grind that exists in the workplace, and 15% of the population can actually say that they're engaged by the definition of engagement. Is bigQUEST, are you saying that bigQUEST is for the everyday situation? Is it for certain things that are requiring big things that, every now and then something comes up that requires a bigger effort than the normal. And so if we have a big push coming up or a product launch, that's when bigQUEST is relevant, or clarify for us which of those it's for.
It's not really after doing incremental project improvement kind of stuff. It's not a framework that goes after incrementality or helping you structure an operational efficiency type initiative. Okay, that's not that. But it's not about big versus small either in terms of ideas. A bigQUEST is about taking an organization forward to achieve something that is really meaningful, that has a lot of uncertainty, ambiguity, and you need to have the collaborative forces across multiple departments working together. And that can be a change in culture you're trying to go after. But when it's multifunctional, and by the way, most challenges today, small and big, cross many different functions. So when you have to lead, but you don't have the control or the authority or the positional power to make change. And by the way, most of the important things to do today, they're so interconnected, you're not going to get those. And so we've been trained on how to lead from a sense of authority and leadership from that way, but how do you lead across connected pieces where you really have to be getting buy-in of hearts and minds across an organization? And I think that is most likely going to happen when you're trying to go into blue ocean type spaces or blue sky spaces where it's never been done before, and you need the collaboration of a lot of different people.
Right. If
you're trying to take on a cost improvement project for your department on how to reduce the copy paper you're using, that's not a bigQUEST. Okay, that's an incremental project of some sorts that you want to do. But when you have to, when you really want to engage hearts and minds and get people to really commit to you to do that, and you need a broad group of people involved, and the future is a bit uncertain, and it's not really clear, there isn't a method to do that and do it well. Mm-hmm. And what I'm seeing is there's more and more opportunities for that all around us, that it doesn't matter what level you're in, those opportunities are there.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, you built this for specific situations.
Yeah, I built it really for a couple different audiences. In the corporate world, most of the big opportunities are looked for or executed by like a senior director. Even VPs tend to delegate it to a senior director type person, and they're the people that have to lead real change. And so even though the senior team might pick 2 or 3 big things to get done, they eventually fall down to someone's going to have to lead. And so this is for them, to help them lead where they can keep that buy-in at the top, be able to marshal across multiple departments, and they're the ones that are getting stuck with real change opportunities, and it's a real promotion opportunity for them. And that's where I've seen and experienced it firsthand. It's often really difficult. I've been on an exec team, and you get these initiatives that are really important, and you ask the question as a team, who we assign this to? And there's a certain group of leaders that are really good at command and control, and they earn their stripes by driving that P&L, getting performance results. But those typically aren't the type of people that excel at cross collaboration, at inspiration, at driving when you don't have control of all the levers. And so this is for those people, because I think we need more of them. And there's a shortage of those that can lead those kind of initiatives. And those are the kinds of challenges coming at companies left and right. I also think it's very viable for top sales teams. So I had the privilege of working at P&G, calling on Walmart back in '91, where it was a time that P&G was changing the whole relationship with Walmart together. It was a storied time. I was really fortunate to get to do that. And that the bigQUEST idea, in my mind, was really ingrained in terms of how do you form top-to-top partnerships to go after bigger ideas that are really, really interesting. And a lot of the bigQUEST framework is built on that idea. When I was at Asda, I had some big tech platform type companies call on us for top-to-top discussions. We could have settled for hey, what projects we want to do, but we chose not to. We chose to go to more of a quest mentality to say, what is the biggest thing that Google and Asda could do together that could really change the game? And that question, what's the biggest thing we could do with Facebook or whatever the platform was? And that's bigQuest thinking, is to push yourself out there to say, what is the challenge that will really push us forward, and then start there and work back, even if we're uncertain how to get it done.
Yeah.
And that is so key and central. So if you're a leader of a sales team that has to call on a client, and you want to take that much deeper relationship to do much more interesting things, this would give you the right type of questions to ask, the right type of way to simplify, and the right way to sequence that so that you can get that commitment from your client to go actually do things that can change the game. And that's the world that I've been living in. So I think it's definitely for top leaders of sales teams or client teams that have that challenge in front of them and want to move beyond a transactional relationship to a strategic relationship.
It sounds like you're describing any situation where the process is either not established yet, or the process maybe needs to be challenged a little bit by some innovative thinking. Because as I'm listening to what you're describing, it sounds like there's a lot of kind of blue sky or blue ocean. And those things come up when, I pictured the executive team sitting around deciding, who are we going to get to lead this thing? So they have an idea of what it is they want to accomplish. They don't know how it's going to happen yet. There's a lot of variables that have to be figured out. But then there's also times when the executives team sitting around and going, we think something might be broken and we need somebody to go in and figure it out. So is it about process? Does process become sort of a milestone or a measuring stick by which you evaluate the relevance of a big quest? Is that, am I sniffing the right thing?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question. I think fixing things that are broken, typically you're going to have, my experience, lots of data, that it's existing data to go look at, because it's been measuring that and you can see it, the data's there, and it's a bit more of a raw scientific left brain model. And if I would look at it and say, if you could solve that with your left brain and you don't need your right brain to figure it out, which there's quite a few problems that you face in business, that's really a left brain. It's a spreadsheet problem because it's just a puzzle that needs to be worked out. That's left brain. Right brain it's a mystery to be solved, because you don't have the data, you don't have all the things there, and it's a bit more uncertainty. So if you're solving a puzzle versus, solving a mystery, and then that's one of the determinators if I would be using a bigQuEST framework or not, because I wouldn't be wanting to apply right brain thinking against a left brain problem. Which is, the machine's down, it's been broken, someone's got to fix this machine, or it's a challenge that can be absolutely sorted. It's a complicated project, but it's not complex.
Right.
Right brain is complex because it's dealt with a level of complexity that you can't see all the pieces together, and you've got to work it out, and you've got to have a lot of different points of view really engaged on it.
Yeah, let me ask you to talk about this too, because I've heard you talk about sort of the trajectory of leadership over the years and the difference between the left brain and the right brain, and how organizations have tended to accommodate to one versus the other, and therefore rewarding one versus the other. And it's led to a little bit of a dearth in the kind of breakthrough thinking that so many companies find themselves needing right now. Talk about that a little bit in terms of the historical trajectory of leadership, left versus right brain.
Well, it's something that's really starting to show up as a problem right now, and it's based on what's happened with post-industrial revolution, where the whole idea of leadership was to take out uncertainty. It was to create order and repeatability. And so the idea of what you wanted from workers is you didn't want a thinking worker, you wanted a doing worker, someone that would repeat the pattern. And so much of management comes from the word manage, which stands for the training and breaking of horses. And so the management philosophy was you're looking for repeatability so that you could get scale. And it was all about driving efficiency and scale. So you don't want a lot of creativity. You know, the thinkers were up here and the doers were down here. And that's been going on for years. And actually, much research will point to there is a bit of a bias against creativity in the workplace because the left brain primarily wants order. It wants order out of chaos so that you can repeat it. You can repeat it, you can measure it, you can measure it, you can scale it. But the world's changed, and the demand for creativity means you've got to find what you're doing is not going to work in the future, and you don't have the data necessarily because the data doesn't give you the answers. You have to move into some right brain thinking and think like an artist. Think like, a person that looks at a blank canvas and has to sort it out. One of the big differences in how that's played out, Ben, is that you've got problems to deal with, right? And you get it's how you look at a problem.
Yeah.
So when you look at a problem, and that problem is something that you immediately say, "I got a solution for that. Let's go." Okay. Well, your left brain really does push for a familiar pattern to pull from very, very quickly. Jump to the solution. Oh yeah, I've seen that before. I got the solution for that. Let's go. And in today's world of uncertainty, you can't really rely on those patterns you've learned from the past because those answers aren't working. They're not working. A right brain person will look at a problem and see it as an open idea to go explore, and they'll fall in love with the problem. Left brain leaders will fall in love with solutions because you got to get to it quickly. And so that's one of the huge differences. And what's needed today is such a passion for jumping into the problem and understanding it and seeing it with fresh eyes that as you interrogate that problem and fall in love with it, the ideas will reveal themselves versus trying to pull an idea from as quick as you can, because that's, our brains are a bit lazy. They want to get to quick answers, especially our left brain side. And so here's the solution right away. But the world doesn't work that way anymore. It's far too complex. And that's something that's been developed over history. We see that. And the other thing that the right brain thinkers might be put into the innovation lab and they get to do that. But now we need innovation coming from more places across a whole company. We need ideas coming from lots of spaces. So we need to figure out how to engage the right brain more. And that's one of the main reasons why I wanted to go down this journey. I do think we're going to see a golden era of creativity. I think it is going to be in front of us as we, the new things we thought were new really don't work. If you look at Pepsi, I forget the exact number, but I was talking to Jeff Swearingen over at Pepsi the other day, and the amount of SKUs they pulled out that just didn't produce results, all these brands that people thought, well, gee, we need to have these brands. Actually, post-COVID, when it goes through that crisis and you look at the challenges of distribution and logistics, those brands are gone, but the sales keep going up. So what are you going to do, 2 years from now, a year from now, once you get post-vaccine and you're looking at shelf space to fill? Yeah. Where are the new ideas going to come from? And the data you had is not going to be useful because it's all been spiked by a COVID, a historical bump into your data systems. And so that's why I mean by the creativity required to think through all the stuff that got ditched pre-COVID that we knew were not working anyway, but we just didn't have the courage to pull the trigger and say, cut that from the portfolio. Yeah. That's what's going to also be, I think, in front of us.
bigQUEST Podcast with Andy Murray will return right after this break.
Today, more than ever, we need leaders who lead with the values of excellence, professionalism, innovation, and collegiality, which stand for EPIC. These are the values the Walton College of Business consistently demonstrate. I've worked with the Walton College as a business owner or executive for over 25 years, and I can tell you with certainty, the students we've hired, the exec ed programs, and the insights from their research have made an epic impact and continue to inspire me with new ways of thinking. Their vision to bring thought leadership to the challenges business face today, such as business integrity or how to be a customer-centric organization, that adds real value by creating conversations that connect people with organizations, faculty, industry, and practice. I put a link in the show notes to Dean Matt Weller's Be Epic podcast, where you'll hear stories and get great content that will inspire you to be epic.
Essentially, one of the things you're describing is You describe falling in love with the problem and not just, trying to reach for a solution or falling in love with a solution. And it really sounds like, there's an impulse that comes because the speed and pace of business almost trains us to come up with fast solutions that and the first solution may not be the best solution. So you're describing a little bit more of an incubator mindset where you're free to think about things. Does this require that you have a certain amount of time and resource allocation for additional thinking? How do you slow down? How do you get people to pump the brakes and to enter into more of a bigQUEST mindset?
Well, you bring up a very interesting challenge. There will be and I think that's a leadership challenge. Okay, so there are going to be people that are very interested and just wired to think more curiously about projects and opportunities and challenges, and we'll be able to help them with some tools that will absolutely help them accelerate. And as a mid-level manager, no matter what ecosystem they're working in, for sure. The 5 big questions that we've worked on together to figure out how do you simplify in the right sequence to get very clear and very quick moving forward on where you need to guide yourself, that's very helpful and very, very clear, even in any kind of corporate culture. That'll work in any corporate culture. That's the beginning bits. But the hope I have and the dream I have for bigQUEST and what we're doing here is that it does enter into the consciousness of the CEO and the senior team that there is a different way needed, and we need to build a corporate ecosystem that fosters ideation, that rewards creativity, that has an innovation lab, that is looking and rewards those that might fail because they've tried it, something that doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
That has sponsorships for those that raise their hand and say, I'll take that on. And I will be responsible. There's a lot of leaders, a little bit of a side, but a lot of people don't want to take something on like this because, well, they come and say to the leadership, the senior leadership, I would like to be given this assignment and I would like to have authority to take this. I'd like to have the authority to lead that or whatever. And what they're really looking for is control. Very few leaders show up and say, I want to be held responsible for this. They're like, whoa. Now, I can tell you from a senior leader sitting around an executive team, if we had people walk into the team to show up and say, I want to be held responsible for this, that's like a completely different thing you don't hear.
Automatically know who to pick then, right?
You got it. Yeah, no question about it. But we want the authority, but we don't necessarily want the responsibility.
Yeah.
And so bigQUEST is about helping people have more confidence to take and lead with responsibility when you don't have authority.
Yeah.
And I mean, you've done, I don't know how many years of work in organizational design and development, but tell me how you see this idea of responsibility versus authority. Have you crossed that before?
Oh, of course. Well, first thing I think of is how it really is baked into the culture. My first thought was actually, it kind of boils down to who the person is and what their character is all about. But I've actually seen a lot of great people succumb to a culture of, deflecting responsibility. So it really is kind of both things.
That's true.
You're talking about needing the need to shift the culture, because you don't just go into a state organization and say, okay, now we're going to pump the brakes. Now we're going to take time. And so I want to get you to talk for a minute about, because this is more than just, a series of epithets that sound great about, bigQUEST and how to do things different and everything else. You actually have a framework. Could you take us through, just at a high level, the depth to which you've thought this through and made this sort of, transferable into organizations, or even it's into teams within an organization? So this is really bottom shelf accessible for people. It's not just a podcast name and a bunch of, great sayings. Take us through the framework, if you don't mind, just at a high level.
Well, yeah, I will. And to be clear, I'm a boots on the ground kind of guy, right? So I'm a boots on the ground field general. So it doesn't, I don't have a lot of time for hyperbole and just going through sayings. And nothing drives me crazier than hearing a saying posted by somebody saying, hey, everyone should take more risk.
Right.
Well, what does that mean
That's
today?
helpful.
That's helpful. And so the world doesn't need more hyperbole about how to lead or how to be a leader. Yes, I applaud the mindset, but you've got to have a method that stands the test of boots on the ground. What does that really mean? And so that's where I've been focusing on, is connecting the mindset was great of, take more risk, but actually I want to create a method that de-risks risk.
Mm-hmm.
There's a way to de-risk something that's unknown. That's what I want. I don't want to just take risk. Why would I do that? That doesn't make any sense to me. So I've tried to say it's this, not that, because a lot of that comes at us is hyperbole. And so that's the way I've looked at it. It starts really all bigQUEST. You've got to, before you want to take on a challenge, you really want to plan it out, and you want to think your way through the launch and what you're trying to do. And so there's 5 key questions that we'll get a chance to talk through over this series, but defining the single biggest problem you want to solve. And we'll go into that. Why is that important? But that is always the starting point. And when you really interrogate the problem, get close to it, a lot of times ideas will reveal themselves.
You can't fall in love with it if you don't identify, right?
Well, that's true. I guess you could in some environments, but it wouldn't be pure.
Right.
It's not real love. And so, yeah, exactly. So that is true. And then secondly, defining the outcome. And boy, I talk to so many people from a mentoring standpoint, and when you get into a situation you're in, you could really lose sight on what's the outcome I want to achieve. And that question, we'll go into a lot of depth on what do we mean by outcome. But in my own personal life, if I've gotten into a discussion, I'll put it that way, with my wife, it could easily get into something that degrades down into you're not even sure what you're talking about, and then it goes into bringing out the greatest hits. So and when I get into the situations, I've learned to stop and say, what's the outcome I want from this conversation? And it totally changes, but that same thing's true in work. And so when you look at these problems, what's the outcome you want to have that customer have? Outcomes are so much bigger than objectives. And that's where we get confused. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the single biggest barrier. I mean, you're going to find thousands of barriers when you start trying to do something new, and you can get overcome by those. But in truth, there's almost always an elephant in the room. That's the single biggest barrier. And when you identify that and talk about it and work through it, you'll be able to take that on as a dragon to be slayed and go through it, and you'll probably find the single biggest barrier is pretty common across different types of quest. And then what holds up a lot of people is this idea of how's it going to get measured. And what I've tried to do with this methodology is walk toward everything that gets you in trouble or throws you off course or is going to challenge, because they actually Pareto out pretty easily that these are the common things of every big thing I've tried to do I run into. And so let's walk toward the barking dog, write them down, how the best people go about it, how they get the best results. And that's what we've tried to codify. And so the biggest barrier, the problem, and the metrics is one of them. And if you walk past and ignore, how are you going to measure success? You're in for a real surprise as you get to the chief finance officer asking, how does this pencil out? So you want to get in front of that thing and be able to have some ideas on how do you solve that particular problem. And then lastly, it's important is what can you do every single day? And if you want real change and real progress, it's got to be in the psyche and this gestalt of the organization every single day. And that is, we'll talk through many case studies where by being part of one action, simple every single day, can absolutely create a movement of ideas. And one of the misnomers, Ben, is that bigQUEST is about a big idea. It's not. It's not about having a big idea. It's about, maybe it's about creating a movement of many small individual single ideas that add up to a movement. And I've seen Walmart with Lee Scott completely changed Walmart's culture with towards sustainability by creating a single biggest challenge of every single day through the personal sustainability pledge, where every employee made one.
Yeah.
And you take 1.7 million people up against a challenge, all of a sudden ideas are coming from everywhere.
Wow.
And that's what I mean by every single day. We'll talk a bit in the framework around sequencing change. That's important. Ben, there's stuff in there about how we can come up with what's really important toward buy-in, which is how you tell the story toward a visual value proposition. And having a visual value proposition which really clears out A to B, how am I going to get to A to B, then people can understand that and jump into it. It's got to travel by itself. Through that is how you work through the storytelling. So storytelling is really important. Talk about how you overcome barriers, how you slay dragons. So the most common problems a quest has that it's been seen through multiple different lenses. And so we'll come at that. And then lastly, how do you invite others to participate? You're going to need people to want to commit, and people will support what they co-create.
Yeah.
It's really hard to kill something that you co-create.
Yeah.
And getting people to co-create, it means you're going to have to let go. You can't have all control. You can't just give people tell-dos. It's going to be something that you want them to participate with you, and let them actually have real meaningful contribution on that creative process. And so that co-creation is just magic in terms of creating commitment.
Yeah. So it's interesting as I'm listening to those 5 questions. And by the way, the 5 questions are just the beginning of how you launch this framework. The 5 questions are part of it. You also go through the mindset, the methodology or the method, and the motivation to sustain the motivation. Those are sort of the big umbrella categories for those things. But as you were describing them, it dawns on me that you're really touching on all the pillars of culture. That's what shapes culture and all those different things. The interaction of people collaborating, the decisions at the top and whether the tops are connected to each other. All those things that you essentially have a model for culture in this whole thing, and how to move meaningful work forward. Now, you've worked at some places I've heard of before. You've worked at Procter and Gamble. I've heard of that. I've heard of Walmart. I've even heard of Saatchi and Saatchi. So I'm just curious. I picture you having a 35-year or so career working at these different places, and I'm trying to imagine to myself when the different pieces of the bigQUEST ideas fell into place. Were there, and I also think about how some of your career was just a flat out entrepreneurial venture, and some of it was the exact opposite, working for the largest company in the world. And I almost wondered, did some of the innovative thinking, and then you go into these big lumbering companies, and you get frustrated. It's like, no, it should be more like a bigQUEST. But what are the different places that you think of that you either birthed the idea for this or saw it in action? Take us through some of the highlights.
Sure. Real quick. I mean, Procter & Gamble was a great example, young in my career. And everybody told me the secret to get promoted. And the secret to get promoted was stay in Cincinnati and be visible on the elevators. And I did just the opposite. And I headed to the fringe because nothing really innovative in my experience happens in the fringe. Stephen Gould talks about punctuated equilibrium of how evolution really happens, and that you got to get to the fringe, and that's where you see the big leaps. And that became a principle for me that I jumped in on. And so went to Jackson, Tennessee, when everybody said, why are you going to Jackson, Tennessee? And my wife's like saying, why are we going to Jackson, Tennessee? But we were able to do some real innovative things because we were outside of that core central ecosystem where no one was paying attention.
Right.
And boy, did we fly and do some breakthrough stuff. Fayetteville, Arkansas, when I came back to Cincinnati for a few years and went to Fayetteville, Arkansas, and I had to look it up on the map. And so what's going on? down there, but I heard of a leader, Tom Muccio, that was one that you really want to get a chance to work for as a top-notch leader. So I came down to work for him. It's going to be a 2-year assignment, and it turned into the most amazing space. And so I learned at P&G to look for the fringe, get out of that. You can do some really interesting things in big companies, but it's a mindset. And I think the mindset work really started to take shape in the P&G culture. In the space of the Dayspring world, it was my first really foray into creativity and true right brain types organizations where you're working through the creative process and breaking creativity down to a process that you can repeat it in a way that works at scale. And that's where the methodology of creativity really took shape for me. Starting an agency from scratch. I mean, my gosh, it was all blue ocean, and there was nothing to optimize. And when we started that, it was a dream to build a great company, and just put that on a card and started going and looking for those opportunities. The first day of that job was opening the paper, being incredibly curious. And the first thing I saw was an article from the Arkansas Gazette talking about how the Walton Foundation had given $50 million, the largest private grant at that time, to a public university, to the Walton College, or to the College of Business at the University of Arkansas. So I picked up the phone and called the dean, cold called him, and said, "Hey, congratulations!" Got through to his office. "Congratulations on getting this gift. How would you like to be known as the Wharton School or the Kellogg School than just the college you got the gift? Mm-hmm. And now's the time to do that." And he's like, "Yeah, that's great. Who are you again?" I said, "I'm Andy Murray, and it's my first day on the job, and I can help you." He invited me down and got a contract, a 6-month contract, to brand the Walton College, brand what became the Walton College of Business. And so that opened up all kinds of connections. But it was that moment of just being all in, fully committed, and thinking through, what problem out there can I help solve that's really an important problem. And I recognized the dean had a problem. Mm-hmm. And he didn't know he had a problem yet, but he did have a problem. I helped point it out and became part of that solution and looking for the outcome. So those principles have followed me, I think, in different various forms. And just having the last 7 months almost of time to codify that is really helped. When I was in the middle of building the agency and growing it, I did a TEDx talk on how to live a compelling quest. So that was 15 years ago. So it's always been something on my mind, that there's an opportunity to engage people differently and go do new things that haven't been done before. And those opportunities are all around us every single day. And you don't have to be at the top. You can be in the middle, and life becomes so much more interesting. As Henry Thoreau said, most men live lives of quiet desperation, and they go to their graves with the music still inside them. Yeah. And I don't want to retire at the end of my career with the music still inside me and head to Florida with the rest of the retired people go, I suppose. Yeah. So I think there's an opportunity to get the music out. And I guess that's my passion, Ben, is to two things. One, help people understand they can do more than they probably can imagine if they could tap a bit more comfortably into their right brain. And then looking at making meaningful work for others is just as important as doing meaningful work for yourself.
Yeah. Some of us were talking, your development team, and we were talking about, all the different things that you've experienced in this sort of, your resume, basically. But it's almost like you've experienced this. You're a creative guy, even though you say that you didn't start creative until you built an agency. But essentially, you could look at bigQUEST as a codified method for introducing creativity in any situation. Some of us look at that and say, what you've done basically is you've made the creative process so bulletproof that you could take it into an organization where there's maybe not a lot of creativity and creative thinking going along, either because they don't have those kind of people there, or they just have such rote processes that nobody wants to touch because they're sacred, because they are the cash cows. But what bigQUEST does for people is it allows them step by step, methodically to go through and really challenge some conventions that maybe are overdue for challenging, or in some cases, when the world changes and suddenly you have to reinvent everything. This is a framework that you can use to sort of walk you step by step through the process. One of the things you talk about a lot, and it really is a trigger for bigQUEST, is the idea of leading into a situation where certainty is just not there. How do you, the formal, the conventional method of, making a plan and then executing the plan and then debriefing with everybody. I think I've heard you say that there's a lot of situations where you're heading into something and you have no idea even what the third step is, much less how it's going to, begin with the end in mind. What are some examples that you've seen where it was imperative that you do that? Actually, can I ask you to talk about, just the whole idea of viewing stores as a media channel? To me, that is just one of the best examples of a bigQUEST.
Well, I was just thinking that when we were speaking. So P&G was the early pioneer in this space, and there might have been other companies doing it. I'm not aware of it, but P&G was the early pioneers where they saw the media spend. They saw the number of eyeballs going through a store at Walmart at over 100 million a week, which is more than any TV rating kind of environment, right?
Wow.
So they said there's got to be a pony in there somewhere, and that's getting, how can you treat that differently? And so through a series of events, and I was right at that epicenter, trying to build an agency. I became a partner to P&G to be able to figure out how do we make something out of this space that is different. And so I began to grow an agency in that space where I hired guys that were psychologists, Dr. Chris Gray, to look at the whole shopping process, to turning it into a methodology. And we turned it into a system of creativity that allowed us to help turn more shoppers into buyers for big brands that were selling at Walmart. We were the first to do that. And that's where I probably understood how do you take method, mindset, and motivation and put it into how you systematize creativity, because we needed to do that and grow very fast. So it went from 15, 17 people to 65, 75, 150, 600, 22 offices around the world. And when we started opening up offices around the world to do this, because it really took off with P&G and then at Coke and other clients, but P&G really wanted us to scale globally because they saw the power in what we were doing. And so they gave us a really great opportunity to work with them to do that scale. And that's why I partnered with Saatchi and got 22 offices to open up around the world. And so you have to understand, I'm going into Poland or I'm going into Moscow to the Saatchi office there, finding 2 or 3 people to teach them about a way of doing advertising they had never heard of or thought of or much, and learning that skill very quickly, and learning how to motivate a team to get excited about something that they didn't really understand, in order to build a quality product that could be put into play with Procter & Gamble at a very short amount of time. And so I did that in Paris and Guangzhou, all around the world with a great team. We had to create methodologies that allowed creativity to come into an environment and do what for them would be blue sky work. Mm-hmm. And so that idea of taking around, that's what I did. I mean, that's what I'm passionate about doing. And so your reflection on why would this bigQUEST thing be a legitimate process, or what is it really? It is a creative approach, but it's based on years of doing, taking mindset, method, and motivation, because you've got to have motivation in there, and putting it into repeatable processes that scale, that have real business results. Yeah. And that's what we did with shopper marketing around the world. I'm trying to do that for new initiatives that have some blue sky uncertainty involved in it, and that's the same thing.
Yeah. Well, this is a real moment for any real industry because, like you suggested at the beginning, we're at an inflection point in sort of history, coming off the Industrial Revolution, really. But we're at a point now where creative thinking has made its way all the way up to the top of some of the most stable organizations. And so, there's always been the 1% who will come in and provide just enough shake up and new vision. But honestly, the marketplace requires more than 1% of that right now. And so the great thing that I see about bigQuEST is that, you've codified it. You've created a method for people to maybe enable and empower 6, 10, 20, 30% of the leadership to execute on a creative mindset, to enact change at the level that.
Well, and you couldn't be more right. I mean, the IBM study they do with CEOs and executives create over 1,000 CEOs they survey on a regular basis. That creativity was the number one
there you go.
desire.
Yeah.
And so you've got creativity on one as number one desire. You've got then disaffected people waiting to be ignited with something more interesting in life.
Right.
And so what's the missing piece? And you got ideas all around us and challenges. We're up to our eyeballs and problems. You're missing is the leader that can pull those pieces together.
Right. Yeah. And I think of all the, Dilbert cartoons and things over the years, which is really just, the soul crying out for creativity to enter into these places where it normally doesn't exist. Well, so we're just about out of time here, but in the coming episodes, we're going to dig in. Now, this series is dedicated to the 5 big questions, but that's not the entire bigQuEST framework. That's simply a way to give some of your listeners just a foray into what bigQuEST is all about. So you've created this download that can be found on the bigQuEST website, bigQuEST.com. Yep. People can go there and download this 5 big questions, this sort of checklist that you've created to help people start a big quest. And even if that's all they did was to get their head around these 5 big questions. And so that would do immensely more than to catalyze the creative process for people.
No doubt. I mean, I got to tell you, Ben, those 5 big questions are leadership gold for any leader trying to do anything. And it's the starting point then to go on to the other elements of how do you go do blue ocean work. But these 5 big questions are absolute leadership gold for people wanting to be effective leaders from the top to the bottom.
Yeah. And some, if you listened to the description of those 5 questions, I want to tell you, some of them may have sounded pretty intuitive, but there's some counterintuition involved too. So you have to download this thing. The 5 big questions on the bigQuEST.com website. There's Andy is on there. He's in the download. He explains to you, walks you through that. And in addition, Andy, you're giving away certain select reserved spots when people sign up. You can't just sign up. You have to actually execute some of the, turn in your answers. But you can get free time with Andy Murray. How's that going to work?
Well, money back guarantee on the free part, right? But what I found is, Ben, my goal is to really help people do this and understand it and be there to help. And sometimes you can get stuck. And I would do 15-minute meetings all the time and open my calendar up at work. And it really allowed people come in and focus. And that's all they wanted. They just needed really a bit to get unstuck. And so I'm pulling about 20 hours a week out of my schedule to make that time available because I want to talk to people. That's the best part of my day sometimes is being able to engage with someone and be there as a bit of a guide. I'm not a consultant, nice. but I'm a guide.
Yeah, that's great. So you've been doing that already, and you might as well keep doing it. So that's very great.
Yeah.
So run to your computer or your mobile phone, bigQuEST.com, download the Big 5 Questions checklist to help you plan your big quest. And if you're one of the first people there, you can look for a spot to reserve some time with Andy Murray. Also, I hear news of a summit coming up sometime in April where you're going to be. Tell us what you know about the summit so far.
Well, it's in the planning stages, actually pretty far in the planning stages. We're getting ready to move into the whole next stage of production. But yeah, we're looking at over 20 top thought leaders and practitioners that really have demonstrated some aspect of bigQuEST leadership and thinking that I think you're going to find very exciting. But then there'll be Lots of content available with seminar pieces, training modules, opportunities for you to participate with your full team. And I think it's going to be one of the most exciting summits for some time that we've put together in a leadership but actionable state of the type of work we're talking about.
Yeah, so be on the lookout for more information on the summit. And hey, that's going to do it for this episode. As always, visit the bigQUEST website where you can find an ever-growing repository of valuable resources to help you simplify your challenges, outsmart the variables so you can celebrate the victories. Just go to bigQUEST.com, and while you're there, be sure to download the free 5 Big Questions checklist that we'll be talking about in the next 5 episodes. And that'll help you walk your team through the 5 big questions that every successful right brain leader follows when launching a big quest. Hey, with this podcast, we're on a big quest too. So please like and subscribe and share this episode with your friends and colleagues. And be sure to join us on the next episode where we dive into the first of the big 5 questions you need to ask before launching a quest. For Andy Murray and the rest of the bigQUEST team, I'm Ben Ortlip saying thanks for listening. And until next time, think big and quest on.